predator becomes prey in the Florida Everglades as hundreds of hunters descend on the Sunshine State to catch and kill as many Burmese pythons as possible.
Florida has a massive problem slithering through the Everglades, and it is growing bigger by the day. We are talking about thousands of invasive Burmese pythons taking over the swamps and eating everything in sight. The state finally decided enough was enough and launched a massive operation to remove them. But once the dust settled and the hunters came back with piles of giant snakes, a new problem emerged. No one knew what to do with the bodies. The solution they came up with is stranger than you could ever imagine. The 17-foot nightmare. You might think you know what a swamp sounds like. You imagine crickets, frogs, birds calling out, and maybe the splash of an alligator. But if you walk into certain parts of the Florida Everglades today, you will notice something terrifying. It is quiet. It is dead quiet. That is because something has eaten almost everything. We are talking about the Burmese python. This is not just a snake problem, this is an invasion. These creatures are native to Southeast Asia, but they have made themselves right at home in the Florida heat. They have no natural predators here. Nothing can stop them. They grow massive, sometimes reaching lengths of over 18 feet, and they are hungry. The numbers are honestly hard to wrap your head around. Since the year 2000, the state has removed more than 18,000 pythons, and that is just the ones they found. Experts think there could be tens of thousands more hiding in the sawgrass, invisible to the naked eye. So, how did this happen? Well, it is not that simple. Some people say a hurricane destroyed a breeding facility back in the 90s, releasing babies into the wild. Others say it was pet owners who realized their cute little snake grew into a 10-foot giant that could crush a human, so they let them go in the woods. However it started, the result is a disaster. The situation got so bad that Florida started the Python Challenge. It is basically a bounty hunt. They pay people to go out into the dangerous swamps and catch these things. And people show up in droves. We are talking about professional hunters, amateurs, and thrill seekers all competing to bag the biggest snake. In 2022 alone, hunters removed over 230 snakes during just a 10-day competition. One guy, a 19-year-old, caught 28 of them by himself. That is a lot of snake. When you pile them all up, you are looking at thousands of pounds of reptile. But here is the catch. These snakes are not just scary, they are destroying the balance of nature. Raccoon populations dropped by 99% in some areas. Marsh rabbits and bobcats are disappearing. The pythons are eating the Everglades from the bottom up. When the hunters bring these snakes in, it is a spectacle. Crowds gather to see the massive bodies stretched out on tables. They measure them, weigh them, and take photos. It feels like a victory. Everyone cheers because that is one less predator eating the native wildlife. But after the photos are taken and the prizes are handed out, the crowd goes home. The lights turn off, and the officials are left with a massive pile of dead snakes. We are talking about tons of biomass. You cannot just leave it there to rot. It poses a health risk. So the big question keeps coming up. What do you actually do with thousands of dead pythons? You might think the answer is easy, just feed them to animals or eat them, right? Well, hold on a second. It turns out these snakes are hiding a toxic secret that makes them dangerous even after they are gone. The disposal method they chose was not what anyone expected. The poison in the glades. So here is the deal. When you see a massive animal that is made of pure muscle, your first instinct is to think about food. People eat alligator tail in Florida all the time. It is a delicacy. So naturally, when the python problem exploded, everyone thought they had solved world hunger. Why not just barbecue the snakes? It sounds like a perfect plan. You remove the pest, and you get a free meal. Hunters were excited. Chefs were ready to try out new recipes. Python curry, python jerky, python steaks. It could have created a whole new industry. But science stepped in and said, absolutely not. The crazy part is that these snakes are loaded with mercury, and we are not talking about a safe amount, we are talking about dangerous levels that could mess you up. Here is how it works. Mercury is a heavy metal. It is in the environment, usually from pollution or natural sources. It settles in the water and gets absorbed by the tiny plants and bugs at the bottom of the food chain. Then, small fish eat those bugs. Then bigger fish eat the small fish. Every time a bigger animal eats a smaller one, it absorbs all the mercury that was inside its prey. This is called bioaccumulation. Now think about the python. It is an apex predator. It eats the big fish, the raccoons, the possums, and even the alligators. By the time you get to a full-grown python, it has absorbed the mercury from thousands of other animals. It is basically a swimming toxic waste dump. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or the FWC, did some tests. They found that the mercury levels in python meat were sky high. If you ate it regularly, you could suffer from nerve damage, kidney issues, and a whole list of other nasty health problems. So the idea of selling python meat in supermarkets was thrown out the window immediately. They had to issue strict warnings. Do not eat the snakes. Do not feed the snakes to your pets. Do not even leave the carcasses out for other animals to eat, because then you are just poisoning the scavengers too. This creates a huge logistical headache. Imagine you have 5,000 pounds of meat that looks good but is actually poison. You have to treat it like hazardous waste. You cannot just dig a hole and bury it everywhere, or you might contaminate the groundwater. Most of the time, the hunters who participate in these challenges do not want the whole snake. They want the skin or maybe the skull as a trophy. But the meat, it is useless. It is heavy, it smells, and it takes up space. So the state has to step in. They have designated drop-off points. Hunters bring the snakes in, they get measured, and then the bodies are taken away to be incinerated or disposed of in special landfills. It is a grim end for such a powerful creature. But people are creative, and even if you cannot eat the meat, there is still something very valuable on a python. The skin. The pattern on a Burmese python is beautiful. It is intricate and unique, and in the world of high fashion, that kind of beauty is worth a lot of money. So, while the meat was getting tossed, a new industry started to rise from the ashes. But turning a swamp monster into a fashion statement is harder than it looks. The leather loophole. Basically, everyone loves a good pair of snakeskin boots. It is a classic look. For years, the fashion industry imported python skins from Southeast Asia to make luxury bags, belts, and shoes. We are talking about items that sell for thousands of dollars. So, when Florida realized they had thousands of these snakes right in their backyard, a light bulb went off. Why import skins from halfway across the world when we have an endless supply right here? It seems like a win-win. You incentivize hunters to take out the snakes by letting them sell the skins. The hunters make money, the state gets rid of the snakes, and the fashion industry gets their leather. But here is the catch: it is never that simple. Processing a python skin is hard work. You have to be careful. You have to skin the snake almost immediately after it is neutralized, or the scales will start to slip off and rot. In the middle of a hot, humid swamp, that is a race against time. Then there is the size. The snakes in Florida are wild. They have been fighting alligators, scraping against sawgrass, and getting bit by parasites. Their skins are often scarred or damaged. High-end fashion brands usually want pristine, farm-raised skins that are perfect. A wild Florida python looks tough and rugged, which is cool for some things, but maybe not for a $5,000 handbag. Despite this, a local industry has sprung up. There are craftsmen in Florida who specialize in tanning python hides. They turn these invasive pests into wallets, phone cases, and even pants. It is becoming a badge of honor to wear something made from a Florida python. It says you are helping the environment. The state encourages this. They want the snakes to have value because if they have value, more people will hunt them. If a hunter knows he can get a bounty from the state and then sell the skin for a few $100, he is going to spend more time in the swamp. Some researchers are even looking into ways to make the tanning process easier and cheaper so that more people can do it. They want to turn the invasive python into a purely economic resource. But there is a darker side to this too. If you create a massive market for python skins, do you accidentally encourage people to keep them around? It is a concept called the cobra effect. If you pay people for snakes, some people might start breeding them just to sell them. Florida has to be very careful to make sure they are eliminating the population, not farming it. Even with the leather industry taking some of the skins, there is still the problem of the rest of the body. The leather is just the outer layer. You are still left with 90% of the snake, the guts, the bones, the toxic meat. And this leads us to the most interesting part of the story, the scientists. While the hunters are out for trophies and cash, the scientists see these dead snakes as a gold mine of data. Every single snake that is caught tells a story. And what they are finding inside these snakes is absolutely terrifying. It explains why the swamp has gone so quiet, and it hints at a future that is even scarier. What they found inside the stomachs changed everything. Researching the beast. The crazy part is what happens in the lab. After the pythons are weighed and measured, many of them end up on a stainless steel table in a research facility. This is where the real work begins. Scientists perform necropsies, that is basically an autopsy for an animal. They cut the snakes open to see exactly what is going on inside. And the most important thing they look for is the gut content. They want to know what the snake ate for its last meal. This research has been shocking. They have found entire deer inside pythons. They have found alligators. They have found the remains of rare birds that are on the endangered species list. In one case, they found 3 deer inside a single snake. It proves just how voracious these predators are. This data is crucial. It helps the state understand the impact on the ecosystem. It proves that the pythons are not just a nuisance. They are an ecological wrecking ball. But beyond the stomach contents, there is the question of the biomass itself. Biomass is just a fancy word for organic material that can be used for energy. There has been serious talk about using invasive species for things like fertilizer or even biofuel. The idea is that if you are going to remove tons of organic matter from the environment, you should try to recycle it back into something useful. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission has explored all options. While they are not currently running a power plant on snake oil, the concept is being discussed for invasive species management in general. Right now, the primary use for the carcasses that are not skinned is research and monitoring. They test the tissue for mercury levels to see if the toxicity is changing. They check the reproductive organs to see how fast they are breeding. They found that female pythons can lay up to 100 eggs at a time, and they guard those eggs. This explains why their numbers exploded so fast. Knowing this helps the hunters target the females during breeding season to have the biggest impact. So in a way, the dead snakes are being used as a weapon against the living ones. The information we get from the dead bodies teaches the hunters how to be more efficient. There is also a psychological aspect. The state displays these massive snakes at educational events. They bring a preserved 18-footer to schools and fairs. It scares people, but it also educates them. It teaches the public why you should never release a pet into the wild. It turns the snake into a symbol of what happens when humans mess with nature. But even with all this research and all the leather making and all the hunting, the problem is not going away. The snakes are adapting. They are getting smarter. They are moving further north. Recent studies suggest that pythons might be evolving to tolerate colder weather. If that happens, they could spread out of Florida and into Georgia and Alabama. The Underground Highway. Now, if you think the snakes hiding in the sawgrass are scary, wait until you hear the theory that keeps the experts awake at night. We know the state has removed over 18,000 pythons since the year 2000. That sounds like a big number. It sounds like a victory. But some researchers look at that number and they do not celebrate. They get worried because the math does not add up. Based on how much food is disappearing in the Everglades, all those missing raccoons, rabbits, and possums, there should be way more snakes than we are finding. We are catching the ones that make a mistake. We are catching the ones that sunbathe on the levees or cross the roads. But where are the smart ones? Where is the main population? There is a wild, terrifying theory gaining traction that suggests we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. The theory is that the pythons have discovered a secret world beneath our feet. You have to understand the ground in Florida to understand this nightmare. Florida is not built on solid rock like New York or California. It is built on limestone. Imagine a giant hard sponge or a massive block of Swiss cheese. The ground is full of holes, cracks, pockets, and underwater tunnels. Scientists call this karst topography, but you can just call it a honeycomb of hiding spots. For millions of years, water has dissolved the rock, creating a massive labyrinth of caves and tunnels right under the surface. We call this the aquifer system. It is where Florida gets its drinking water. But now people think the pythons are using it as a superhighway. Think about the tactical advantage this gives the enemy. On the surface, life is hard for a snake. It is hot. There are alligators. There are humans with trucks and thermal cameras. There are drones flying overhead. But 10 feet underground, it is a different story. Down in the limestone tunnels, the temperature stays cool and constant all year round. It is pitch black, which is fine because snakes smell their way around. And most importantly, it is safe. No hunter can reach them there. If this theory is true, it means the pythons can travel for miles without ever seeing the sun. They could be moving from one swamp to another completely undetected. You could have a team of hunters clear out an entire section of the forest, declaring it snake-free. But the whole time, the snakes are just 20 feet below them, slithering through a flooded tunnel to the next safe zone. This changes everything we know about containment. How do you build a fence to stop a creature that travels underground? You can't. And it gets creepier, because these tunnels are not just out in the wild. The aquifer connects to everything. It runs under the highways. It runs under the farms. It runs right under the suburbs of Miami and Fort Lauderdale. There have been reports that sound like urban legends, but they happen often enough to make you wonder. People claiming they hear movement in the pipes. Snakes popping up in storm drains miles away from the Everglades. There was even a story of a python showing up in a plumbing system. The idea is that there is an entire shadow population living beneath the civilization. While people are sleeping in their beds, thinking they are safe in the city, there could be massive reptiles navigating the wet, dark tunnels right under their floorboards. It turns the ground you walk on into a horror movie. You might be standing on a dry hiking trail looking at the beautiful scenery, but if you put your ear to the ground, you might be standing right on top of a nest. This hollow earth theory also explains why they survive the cold snaps. Florida occasionally gets a freeze. When the temperature drops below 40 degrees, tropical snakes are supposed to die. They freeze up and shut down. But after every freeze, the population bounces back stronger than ever. How? Because the underground highway is climate controlled. When the air outside freezes, the snakes just retreat into the limestone caves where the earth keeps them warm. They wait it out. Then, when the sun comes back, they emerge, hungry and ready to breed. We are fighting a war in 2 dimensions, scanning the surface left and right. But the enemy has figured out how to move in 3 dimensions. And until we figure out how to look underground without digging up the entire state, they have the ultimate advantage. The super snake mutation. If an invisible underground army wasn't enough to make you cancel your vacation, there is another theory that sounds like straight-up science fiction. But some biologists are genuinely worried it is actually happening. It is the idea of the super hybrid. Here's the thing about Florida. It is the exotic pet capital of the world. While the Burmese python is the main villain in this story, it is not the only monster that has been let loose in the swamps. Over the years, rangers have found green anacondas. They have found reticulated pythons. And scariest of all, they have found African rock pythons. Now you need to know the difference. A Burmese python is big, heavy, and generally pretty lazy. Unless it is hungry or threatened, it just wants to sit there. It is a wait-and-see kind of predator. The African rock python is different. It is smaller, but it is mean. It is known for being extremely aggressive. In its native home in Africa, it is considered much more dangerous to humans. It has a bad attitude. It strikes fast, and it does not back down. The nightmare scenario, the one that keeps experts up at night, is that these 2 species meet in the Florida wild and fall in love. In a laboratory, mixing these 2 species is rare, but in the wild, when options are limited, nature finds a way. If a Burmese python mates with an African rock python, they could create a hybrid offspring. Geneticists call this hybrid vigor. It means the baby doesn't just get a mix of traits. Sometimes it gets the most extreme traits of both parents. Imagine a snake that has the massive 18-foot size of the Burmese combined with the nasty, aggressive, man-hunting temper of the African rock. You are not just dealing with a pest anymore, you are dealing with a monster. Some hunters claim this is already happening. They tell stories around the campfire about snakes that act differently. Snakes that don't try to hide when they see a human, but instead stand their ground and hiss. Snakes that seem to strike with a speed that doesn't make sense for their size. If this genetic cocktail is mixing in the swamps, we could be looking at the birth of a new apex predator. A super snake that is designed specifically to rule the Everglades. But the genetic mutation theory goes even further. It is not just about aggression, it is about cold weather. This is the biggest barrier saving the rest of the United States. Right now, the pythons are stuck in South Florida because they cannot handle the cold winters of Georgia or Tennessee. There is an invisible frost line that stops them from moving north. But evolution is a fast learner. Back in 2010, Florida had a record-breaking cold snap. Temperatures dropped and iguanas were falling out of trees. Thousands of pythons perished in the cold. It looked like nature had finally solved the problem for us. But it didn't. It actually made the problem worse. See, the cold neutralized the weak snakes. The ones that couldn't handle the temperature died off. But the strong ones? The ones that were just a little bit tougher or a little bit smarter or had a slightly different metabolism, they survived. And then those survivors bred with each other. We basically ran a natural selection experiment on fast forward. By wiping out the weak ones, we left behind a population of winter soldiers. The new generation of pythons is tougher than the old one. They can handle lower temperatures. There is a terrifying theory circulating among biologists that suggests the containment war is already lost. It revolves around a single, very single, invisible barrier that is currently saving the rest of the United States. We call it the frost line. Right now, the only thing stopping these massive reptiles from slithering out of Florida and into the rest of the country is the temperature. Pythons are tropical creatures. They like it hot and humid. Historically, if they tried to move north into Georgia or Alabama, the winter cold would freeze them in their tracks. They would shut down and perish. But here's the scary part: nature adapts. And there is strong evidence that the snakes are evolving rapidly to tolerate the cold. This goes back to a massive weather event in 2010. Florida was hit by a record-breaking cold snap. Temperatures plummeted for days. It was chaos. Iguanas were freezing and falling out of trees like stones, and in the Everglades, the python population took a massive hit. Thousands of them died in the freezing water. At the time, everyone thought this was a miracle. They thought the weather had finally solved the problem, but they were wrong. What actually happened was a brutal experiment in natural selection. The cold wiped out the weak snakes, it eliminated the ones with poor genetics, but it did not get them all. The strongest, toughest, and most resilient snakes survived. They hunkered down in deep burrows or found warmer pockets of water. These survivors then bred with each other. They passed those tough genes down to their babies. We basically forced them to upgrade. We created a generation of winter soldiers. If these new snakes breed with a species that is already used to mountains or deserts, or if they just naturally select for better cold resistance, that invisible frost line disappears. If that happens, the gates are open. There is nothing stopping a cold-resistant super snake from pushing north. We are already seeing the scouts. Pythons have been spotted further north than ever before, creeping up past Lake Okeechobee and moving toward Orlando. They are testing the waters. They are pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible. Imagine the consequences if they break through the Florida border. They could move into the marshes of Louisiana. The bayou is a perfect habitat for them, wet, warm, and full of food. It would be an all-you-can-eat buffet. They could take over the forests of Alabama. They could end up in the dense backyards of the Carolinas. This creates a future where the python isn't just a quirky Florida news story anymore, it becomes an American problem. Picture this. You are going for a hike in a forest in Arkansas or Tennessee. You are expecting to see maybe a deer, a coyote, or a black bear. You are prepared for those animals. But you are not prepared to look up into the branches of an oak tree and see a 15-foot constrictor looking back at you. It sounds insane. It sounds like a bad movie plot. But you have to remember, 20 years ago, the idea of Burmese pythons fighting alligators in the Florida swamps sounded insane too. People laughed at it until it became real. We might be watching evolution happen in real time, creating a creature that is perfectly designed to conquer the continent. And the twisted irony is that we might have accidentally helped them do it. By hunting them and hoping for freezing weather, we force them to get stronger, faster, and smarter. We train them to survive the worst we could throw at them. The swamp is silent today because the native animals are gone. But if you listen closely to that silence, you might hear the sound of something new getting ready to move out. The invasion might just be getting started. So I have to ask, would you ever wear a pair of boots made from an invasive python if you knew it helped save the environment? Or is it just too creepy? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this wild ride, hit that like button and subscribe for more mysteries from the natural world.